have I got an incredibly enlightening and insights-filled interview with Suzanne Manser, who is a Harvard-trained psychologist and author for you. You will want to find out how Suzanne's narcissistic and well-meaning mother impacted her life, how Suzanne's mom's death led Suzanne to writing this fantastic book, which is titled, I Hate You, a love letter to my mother, healing paper cuts, mother wounds, and intergenerational pain. You're going to find out how parents can impact a child's sense of self. And perhaps the most valuable part of this interview is you're going to learn about how children of narcissists can manage their narcissistic parents. Come join us. It's a wonderful interview. Hi there, and welcome to the Grief and Rebirth podcast. I'm your host, author and trauma survivor Irene Weinberg, here to encourage you wherever you are in your healing journey. In each episode, I chat with incredible grief and trauma specialists, healers, mediums, and celebs, as well as remarkable people who have inspiring healing stories to share. If you're looking for a podcast that's both uplifting and inspiring, you've found it. Let us help you find your joy in life. Hi, everyone. I hope this finds each of you so very well. I'm speaking to you from my studio in West Orange, New Jersey, and I could not be more delighted to have the pleasure of interviewing Harvard-trained psychologist and author Suzanne Manser, PhD, who's been a therapist for over 25 years. Suzanne specializes in fostering self-acceptance, treating people with eating disorders, body image challenges, and anxiety. Plus, she has a wealth of experience supporting those dealing with depression, bipolar disorder, and complex relationship issues. Suzanne's candid and compelling memoir, titled I Hate You, a love letter to my mother, healing paper cuts, mother wounds, and intergenerational pain, serves as both a deeply personal story of transformation and a psychological guide for healing from painful parental relationships. The book empowers its readers to embrace self-acceptance and navigate the complexities of their emotional wounds, and it is complemented by Suzanne's guided journal titled I Hate You, a love letter to my mother, a journal for healing your mother wound and transforming your life, which helps readers through thought-provoking prompts and questions to uncover how their parents' self-protective behaviors inadvertently caused harm and shaped their identities, offering tools for reflection and personal growth. Suzanne also writes articles with the same aim, to help people to accept themselves and do their own deep healing work. Plus, she recently created an online course to help people heal from their childhood wounds and transform their lives. The goal of the course is to help the participants feel liberated and empowered to make meaningful, sustainable changes in their lives. I'm looking forward to talking with Suzanne, who lives in Portland, Oregon, with her husband and her 2 kids, about how her narcissistic, alcoholic, well-meaning mom impacted her, her personal journey to self-acceptance, how parents deeply impact a child's sense of self, the negative effects of intergenerational pain, her advice to adult children of narcissists about managing their relationships with a narcissistic parent, and more, for what will surely be an enlightening interview filled with life-changing healing insights. And before I officially welcome Suzanne to this podcast, I have to say that I am sure many of you are thinking, do I have a narcissistic parent? And how the heck do I handle that parent? I know, and I'm sure many of you know narcissistic people in your lives, and how do I handle that? So this is going to be a really terrific, helpful interview for all of us. And Suzanne, with that, my heartfelt welcome to Grief and Rebirth podcast.
Well, thank you so much. I feel very welcomed, and I'm super excited to be here.
Thank you. I know this is going to be just terrific. It's good. The whole purpose of this podcast is to help people to heal, and this is such an important interview for people. I know that it's going to touch a lot of hearts and wake some people up. So let's define, what is narcissism exactly? How does a person become a narcissist? And can you give us some examples of classic narcissistic abuse that I'll bet a lot of people will relate to?
Absolutely. So narcissism is basically when a person believes that they are unique and have special information that nobody else has, and that they're right all the time, and that they are they're the authority on everything. That's basically narcissism. There are two kinds of narcissism, and that's depending on how they grow up, essentially. So the grandiose narcissists are the ones who are really arrogant and grandiose and, blustery and entitled. Those folks tended to grow up with parents who treated them as if they were just the most special thing on earth, and treated them as if they deserved only the best and, very, very special, unique attention.
And probably brought them up, I would think, that they're very entitled. I would think,
yes,
right? Like
yes,
parents
entitled to everything.
Right.
Exactly.
No humility.
Exactly. And there are vulnerable narcissists who actually grew up kind of the opposite, grew up not being treated very well, not being treated as if they're special. And they developed narcissism as kind of a defense against feeling like they're inferior. And so the more vulnerable narcissists tend to experience, they feel inferior sometimes, they feel superior sometimes, but they always go back to that, I'm right, I'm superior, I've got to be treated a certain way.
Which to my mind says that both types of narcissists become bullies in a certain way, right? To have to prove themselves, whether they feel entitled to it or whether they're trying to prove something. That's how the behavior happens, right? That's why they act that way, right?
Yeah, absolutely. They have to be the most special one in the room, which automatically means that whoever else is in the room is going to be wrong, is going to be inferior. Yeah, is going to get walked on, all that kind of stuff. It's absolutely bully behavior.
So sad. What are some of the hurtful ways? You had a narcissistic, alcoholic, well-meaning mom, which sounds like a contradiction in terms. But what are some of and I know she hurt you in a lot of ways, and she impacted your childhood via what you call paper cuts, which I related to a lot. Lies and disregard for your feelings to prioritize her wants. Do you want to talk to us about that? You've got some great stories. I love the one about your tooth.
I will tell that in a second. So my mom was the more vulnerable narcissist type. She was treated not super well by her parents, and she developed narcissism as a defense against feeling bad about herself. So she wasn't super blustery. She wasn't super arrogant, but she had to be right all the time. And if if anybody wasn't right who was around her, they got corrected real quick. So that was part of my experience as her kid, was even about me and my experience, I could never be right. So for example, another story, I'll get to the loose tooth story in a second, but another story is when my mom drew my baths when I was a little kid, she would make them boiling hot because that's how she liked her water when she took a bath. But, every time I would say, Mom, I can't get in this bath. It's too hot. And she would every time say, no, it's not. And that was the end of the discussion. There was just, she was right. Even though it was my experience, I was not ever right. And she wouldn't put any cold water in. She wouldn't do anything. I literally would have to stand there for probably like 10 minutes before I could even dip a toe in.
Wow.
So yeah, that was, that's how a narcissist thinks. There's nobody else who has a valid point of view if it's not the same as the narcissist's point of view.
Wow. They have a little bit of a problem with the definition of how you express love, don't they?
Yeah. It's very twisted.
Yeah.
It's very twisted. If I may go to the...
Go ahead to the tooth one. Yeah, that was a great story too.
So when I think about 6, I had my first loose tooth. I was standing on the patio with my mom. She had some friends over. We were all just sort of hanging out, socializing. And I was just, playing with my tooth. It was my first loose tooth. I was really excited about it. But I was also, a little bit scared. I didn't know how this was going to go. My mom from across the patio saw me playing with it and she said, Suzanne, come over here. I knew, what she was about. And so I actually said no at first and I hesitated. And she's like, Suzanne, come over here, treating me like I was being ridiculous, which was her kind of go-to move. So there were other people there. I didn't want to seem like I was a problem. I was a very people-pleasy kind of kid. So I went over to her and she said, open your mouth. I just want to see it. And I wouldn't. And she said, I promise I won't touch it. I just want to see it. I did not have my mouth open for like a quarter of a second before she did this and flicked my tooth out with her fingers. And it wasn't painful physically, but emotionally, it broke my heart. She promised that she wasn't going to touch it. She knew how scared I was. And what was more important to her was whatever she wanted, which in that moment was getting the tooth out of my head.
Not only that, it sounds like it was important to her to show off to her friends.
Absolutely. She didn't care what I was thinking. She didn't care what I was feeling. All that she had in her head was, I need to get this, this tooth out of this kid's head.
Yeah, right. And, my friends will see them taking care of it or whatever that is, right? So, go ahead.
I was going to say, it's true because everybody cheered. Once she did that and the tooth came out, everybody on the patio totally cheered and acted like it was a really exciting moment when I was just horrified.
At your expense. At your expense.
Yeah, exactly. And nobody looked at me, thought about how I was feeling, any of that.
And how did this disregard affect you? I mean, I know how it affects you because I experienced something like this too. But how does it affect your beliefs about yourself and the world? And then I know you created a personal armor, which people often do, to protect yourself against this rejection you were getting all the time. So you want to talk about how this formed little Suzanne?
Yeah, absolutely. So how it impacted me, and I didn't realize this, of course, until many, many, many years later, but I was getting messages from my mom over and over and over that I didn't matter. What I needed didn't matter. What I wanted didn't matter. How I felt didn't matter. If it didn't match with what she wanted in that moment, I didn't get it. So it didn't matter if it was, I didn't want her to touch my tooth or I wanted the bathwater to be a little bit cooler. It wasn't going to happen if it wasn't what she thought I should have. So I just developed this belief that I didn't matter. I believed I wasn't that interesting because she never really asked about me. And I believed that my needs and my wants and my feelings were just not important and that hers were because hers were always prioritized. So I grew up not only believing that I didn't matter, but believing that I have to prioritize, in this case, her needs, her wants, her feelings, her opinions. So I grew really attached to her stuff and had no attachment to my own stuff. I had no idea how I felt about things after a while because I kind of stopped paying attention to it too.
I can so relate to this because I'm just going to interject every once in a while because I had a narcissistic parent. And I remember when I started, my parents abandoned me for 23 years. And it's a whole story, but the truth is that when I started to heal, one of the things that I identified with was that I had learned to become I called it the human pretzel. Whatever anybody else needed, that's where I was with absolutely no awareness of my feelings, my wants, my desires. And I would walk into a room and like your mother did when she showed off to her friends and they cheered, I would walk into a room and I learned to be able to read everyone in that room because I knew that my parents cared more about how I impressed all those other people than where I was coming from. And I needed to survive.
Yeah. It's emotional survival. That's exactly right. We become people pleasers. We become social chameleons as a way of surviving because otherwise it feels like, again, we don't matter. We're rejected. If we don't make the other person happy, and if we don't make sure that, in my case, I felt like I needed to keep my mom kind of stable and happy. And that's what kept me stable and happy. So I always had to be oriented towards her, just like you always had to be oriented towards everybody else.
Yeah. Absolutely. Now you learned though, and you talk about self-acceptance. What does it mean for people listening who are caught in this path of pleasing the whole world, not being in touch with their own feelings, identifying that, oh my, maybe some of the stuff I'm going through has to do with my childhood. What does it mean to truly accept yourself? And tell us about your inner work that helped you start feeling more of your own self-acceptance. And third part is that what led to your work as a therapist? Is this what inspired you?
So self-acceptance is knowing that you are worthy and enough, that you're worthy of respect, acceptance, love, without having to do anything. It's not something that you have to earn. It's not something that's conditional upon anything. We all come into this world acceptable and worthy of love and acceptance and respect. But somehow we've got it wrong. We're taught by our parents, or we get messages that you have to do certain things or be certain ways in order to be lovable, to be enough, to be acceptable. And so again, like that's what I learned from my mom, is that, who I was just walking around wasn't enough for her to think that I mattered, or for her to prioritize me and my needs. So that kind of blocked my knowledge of self-acceptance, my knowledge that I was already worthy for, decades. It was maybe my mid-20s towards my late 20s when I started on this self-acceptance journey, where I sort of looked around when I was in grad school to be a therapist. I looked around at my fellow classmates, and they were amazing people who were very authentic and who were very open about their imperfections. And I started to realize that their openness, their imperfections made me like them more, and made them more relatable, and made them more solid feeling, actually, because, a person who's perfect looking and seems like they have it all together, you feel like you can't really get into them. There's
almost like they're a caricature. It's almost like they have this mask, right?
Exactly. And they don't feel like you can connect.
Yeah.
So when I was in grad school and I was around all these people who I felt like I could connect to, and they were modeling for me that you can be imperfect and authentic and still be, of course, fully acceptable and worthy, that's when I was like, oh, this is something I want. I can see now how this works, and I really want this. And that's when I started on my own journey of self-acceptance.
Because you weren't really in touch with your own needs. What prompted you to go to grad school for psychology?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's not what you would think. When I was in college and I was having to, choose my major at age 18 or 19, which I think is really early to know what you want to do with the rest of your life, I decided that I wanted to be a therapist. I didn't know any therapists. I had never been in therapy. I kind of knew nothing about therapy. But to me, I was picturing you sit across from somebody, they tell you all about their life. And that sounded like the most interesting job in the world to me. It sounded like reading books. I'm a reader. I love hearing about people's lives. So that's what I had in my mind that therapy was. So it wasn't actually about like wanting to help people or any of that kind of stuff. It was just about, this sounds like the most interesting job that I can think of.
Sounds like the joke was on you because you wanted to hear their stories, but your job would be to change their stories.
I figured that out. But I'll tell you, it saved me, because when I was in grad school, still had even when I was looking at all these people around me and thinking like, oh, I want to be like this, I still didn't realize the depth of the healing that I had to do. But because I was about to, be a therapist, I thought, well, I should probably have a sense of what it's like to be a patient. So I got into therapy just so that I would know what it was like to be a patient, so that I could be a better therapist. And that's when my journey really began.
That's when the fireworks started going off in your head as you started making connections. I can totally relate to, oh, this stuff that's going on has something to do with my childhood. Oh. So we're talking about how a parent can deeply impact a child's sense of self. But let's talk about, and you talk a lot about this in your book, how does intergenerational pain also affect childhood? Because people often identify, and I was late coming to this party also, I identified that my problem was my parents. It wasn't until much later in my healing that I realized, oh my goodness, wait a minute, maybe it had something to do with their parents and the parents behind them and all of that. So can you explain that to everyone, please?
So I think of intergenerational pain as like a giant game of intergenerational hot potato. So thinking about like great grandparents, something happened, the example I often give is the Great Depression, because that was what my great grandparents were, kids during the Great Depression. During that time, there wasn't enough of anything. Obviously, there was only scarcity. And so a lot of kids grew up in that time feeling like they didn't matter. And it wasn't that their parents were, awful people or necessarily abused them or any of that. It was just that their parents didn't have the bandwidth to give them the attention and the love that would have given them the sense that they mattered. So all these kids grew up feeling like they didn't matter. So that's kind of the hot potato. That's something that's really uncomfortable. You don't want to hold it, right? It's just painful. And so as soon as you have somebody you can throw that potato to, you throw that potato. And in this case, it's going to be your kids, right? You give that feeling to your kids. You treat your kids some way so that they feel like they don't matter. And so, my grandparents had their own hot potatoes. They threw the hot potatoes to their kids. My mom had that hot potato. She was definitely treated like she didn't matter. She definitely took that in. And when I was a kid, she, I say well-intended because she was well-intended. She did not want me to feel bad about myself in the way that she felt bad about herself. And I really think that she kind of tried to make that not happen for me, but she nevertheless threw me the hot potato. And I then, started to believe that I didn't matter. And so there's just this chain reaction of how I was treated is how I treat the next, is how I treat the next, is how I treat the next.
Right. And when someone starts to heal, they finally can change the legacy of that hot potato. But
Exactly.
someone has to know that they can heal and change it. So we're talking about the role. So we're talking about how important it is to validate ourselves about the pain we experienced. We start to look at it, which is very hard and takes a lot of courage to face down that stuff. But oh boy, the relief after you've done it. And we know that what that does to our childhoods. What is your advice? And if I could make this the centerpiece of this interview, what is your advice to adult children of narcissistic parents about managing their relationships with their narcissistic parents? Oh boy!
Oh, man.
Everyone, take notes. Get out the voice recorder.
Well, let me say, I did not do this well when my mom was alive. It took me until after she died to do all of this healing. So this is the wisdom that came to me, unfortunately, only after she died. But the absolute first thing that you need to do is understand narcissism, because the reason that narcissism impacts people in the way that it does is that we take it personally. We believe the person who is treating us so badly. We believe that we don't matter. Whether they say it directly or not, that's the message that we take in. So if we can learn about narcissism and learn that the only reason it got, that potato got passed to us is because we happen to be next in line or we happen to be in the room, it's going to impact us a lot less, or we're going to be able to start detaching from it. So that's absolutely the first thing that you need to do, is learn enough about narcissism to know that it's not a personal thing about you. The next thing you need to do is
because they're still lobbing grenades at you.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know it, but it's still really hard in your relationship with these people.
Yeah, absolutely. Because you never get to be right? Even when it's about yourself, even when it's about your own experience, you are never right. And that's incredibly frustrating, incredibly painful, and incredibly damaging.
Right. So how do you recommend that people deal with a parent who's always right and doesn't really validate them? And I know people in my own current lifetime, to get a validation from them about anything, oh my God, it would be like earth shaking. I don't know what happened to them, but they don't know really how to validate other people in their lives.
Yeah, because if they offer that validation, it feels like it's taking something from them. It feels like it's making them less to give you something. So they're too scared to do that. They're too insecure to do that.
So you've got a mother who's putting you down, and now, though you're an adult, you're in your 30s or 40s or 50s. It's not like when you were a little kid. What do you say when mom's doing that? Or how do you handle it?
Yeah, boundaries. Boundaries is the most important thing. You've got to know what you're willing to tolerate and to accept, and what you're not willing to tolerate and accept. So once you get really clear about what your needs are and what is, what's outside of that boundary and what's inside of that boundary, then you get ready to communicate your boundary to your parent, and you get ready for them to steamroll right over it and ignore it, right? Because they don't care. They're not gonna.
And they're gonna get mad at you. How dare you? Right?
Exactly. Exactly. A boundary tells us that we have sovereignty between our, within that boundary is our space. That's my house. A narcissist has no interest in you having your own space. They don't want you to have sovereignty over yourself. They have sovereignty over you.
Okay.
So narcissists aren't interested in boundaries, but you need to know where your boundary is so that when the narcissist gets right up to it or steamrolls over it, you're ready. You've got something to say. So you've got your boundary, and then there's a consequence to your boundary. So a boundary is, if you make fun of me, if you say something mean to me, I'm going to leave. Kind of clear and simple. And that's the consequence, right? I'm going to leave the conversation, or I'm going to leave the room, or I'm going to leave the whatever. And then you actually have to follow through. And so, and that's kind of it.
And then, but on top of that, they're probably going to call after you leave and say, "You're crazy, you're this, you're that, how dare you, you didn't respect me," blah, 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 right?
Right, absolutely. And there's more boundaries, right, to put up because there's some more bad treatment. What I was going to say in terms of when you have these conversations, one thing that's really helpful is what's called gray rocking, which some people are familiar with. But when you're talking to somebody who's a narcissist, you want to be as kind of non-emotional and non-reactive as possible and give them brief answers, kind of one-word answers if they ask you questions. It's just almost acting like you're a rock a little bit. You don't want to engage in their story and their game. It's not a game that anybody's going to win.
So you're not going to give them fuel for their drama.
Exactly. And that's how you protect yourself with your boundaries and your gray rocking. And you've got to know that it's generally unlikely that this is going to be a relationship that you feel really good in. You have to accept that you can't make the narcissist not be a narcissist.
Yeah.
So that's part of that. You have to accept that if they don't treat you well, you leave or you do whatever you said you were going to do.
Well, I'm a person who had that experience. Like I said, my parents, I was punished. I was abandoned for 23 years. And you know what? At the time, I think I was in my 20s. And at the time, I thought to myself, I could have a nervous breakdown or I could kill myself. But someone said, "Why don't you go to therapy?" And I said, "What's therapy?" And I grabbed on to that golden ring like I couldn't get there fast enough. I didn't know what it was, just like you. I had no idea, but it sounded like something that would help me understand why I was the object of this, right? Excuse me.
Yep.
So, sorry. So, I totally get that. And now I want to know why your mom's death. How did this happen that you got through all this stuff, you're healing and all, you decide to write a book about your relationship with your mom? I Hate You, a love letter to my mother, healing paper cuts, mother wounds, and intergenerational pain. So, and then also in the book, you talk about your struggle to become authentic, pull that mask off. So tell us more about your book.
So my mom died in 2020. I was 48. I had my whole life been trying to not hate her. I had hated her since I was like 10 or something because I just couldn't. It was so painful to be disregarded in the way that she disregarded me. It was so painful. I was in so much pain all the time. And what happened is I hated her and I couldn't get out of that hate. Even when I was adult, even when I became a therapist, I could not stop hating her. I wanted to stop hating her. I knew she didn't deserve it. I knew it wasn't serving me. It wasn't serving our relationship. I knew how to help other people with their feelings. I could not get out of my hate for my mom. And then she died. And I'm not a journaler actually, but after she died, I started journaling for like 8 to 10 hours at a time.
Wow.
I had all this emotion pouring out of me. I had all these memories that I was suddenly remembering, and it was all hate. It was hate and anger.
Every paragraph must have started with, "How dare you? How dare you?"
Oh my gosh. I had lists of like, here's what you did. It was, I think I filled up 2.5 journals, I think, over time. And I didn't realize even that I still had that much because I'd done a lot of therapy about this. I had no idea that I still had all of this feeling and all of this powerful hatred. So I journaled for like 4 months, filled up 2.5 journals. As I was talking to people about it, people were like, "Oh yeah, I've had that experience. Oh yeah, that sounds like my experience with my mom." And I started to realize, I think this is kind of universal. And so I started to turn the journaling into a book. And as I did, I started learning so much more about my relationship with my mom. Once I got past just the letting out of all of the muck and the feelings from, 40 years ago, I started to see who she was. I started to see what her childhood had made her into. And then I started to see the intergenerational pain that had been passed down. I got to know my mom better in those 2 years after she died than I ever had in the 48
Wow.
years that I had known her prior to that. I felt so much closer to her after doing this journaling and writing this book than I ever had. It was such a gift.
Wow, what a blessing. What a blessing. And then you created this guided journal, right?
And then I created a guided journal. Yep.
So tell us about that, because that really helps people to gain insights and help on their healing journeys also, right?
Yeah. So my book is a psychological memoir. It's my story, but it's all the psychology that I know about, why we become the way we become and how we reclaim ourselves. The guided journal is about your story. It's about you. I ask all these questions about your family and the messages that you got that you probably didn't even realize you got. I ask questions to help you understand how they impacted you and who you became. And then I teach you 8 tools to help you become the person that you want to become and have the life that you want to have. So it's really a way to get in there and engage with your own story.
Wow, that's great. I could have used it in my 20s, I'll tell you, Suzanne.
Me too.
It might have shortened a lot of years of therapy to have that as a tool. I think that's wonderful. And you also share a story in your memoir about peeing in your pants all through your first group Taekwondo class. By the way, I take Tai Chi at age 50 due to pelvic floor issues. Can't relate at all. With lots of people watching and your husband taking photos. And you say that this became a profound healing experience for you. How old were you at this time? 50?
I was 50.
You had therapy. You've done all this stuff. You're writing your book. And then you have this and you still have another healing experience. So tell us about that.
Well, first of all, I'm pretty convinced I'm going to have healing experiences till I die. I don't think that ever stops, and that's wonderful.
Right.
So when I was 50, my kids were, 6 and 8 or something like that. So my kids were in a Taekwondo class that was a family class. So it was kids and adults were also allowed to be in that class. There were maybe 1 or 2 adults, a lot of kids. And I had told my kids that, at some point I will join you and I'll do the Taekwondo class with you, thinking it'd be really fun and kind of easy. No, was not. So for the first class, I'm in my white uniform. I've got the white pants on. I've got the white top on. I've got the belt on. I'm feeling kind of anxious, but kind of cool. And I had not been doing jumping jacks or crawling on the floor like a bear or all these things that suddenly we were doing in this class. I hadn't realized that my pelvic floor issues were so acute. And so we're doing jumping jacks. We're warming up. And suddenly I'm like, oh my God, I am peeing my pants right now. And we're in a group class. There's a wall of windows where all the parents watch. And my husband was watching and taking pictures. At the very beginning of the class, I started peeing my pants. And then we're going through the whole class, which is, 50 minutes long or something. I'm having to do kicks toward the instructor. God. And I'm just thinking, oh, I don't even know what to do, but I am here. It is important to me that I'm here for my kids. It's important to me that I'm here for me. Even though I'm embarrassed as all get out, I'm going to do this. And so I stayed in that class for that whole class.
Very uncomfortable, to say the least.
So uncomfortable. My face was bright red the entire time, I'm sure. I was willing my husband to stop taking photos. He did not stop taking photos. And then I came back the next week and I came back the week after that. And I finally did some pelvic floor physical therapy to stop that situation. But, I did what I had to do because it was important to me to be there for my children, for me. And then it was really important for me to be authentic. And so I told everybody that I peed my pants. I put it on social media. My kids knew for sure. Everybody knew because I want to be authentic. I don't want to be ashamed about anything anymore. I grew up in so much shame about who I was. Any little mistake brought a ton of shame, and that made me hide, and that's not helpful. So I'm doing the opposite now. When I do something that's, peeing your pants at age 50 is not fabulous, but I'm going to tell you about it because it's really important and meaningful to me to be authentic. And that's where my healing comes in, for sure.
That's beautiful. I have to say that I think another reaction to having a narcissistic parent is that we feel we have to be perfect all the time. I was the same way. Had to get the perfect grades, I played the violin. I can remember being asked to play the violin for people who were like relatives who were sleeping in front of me, but it didn't matter. I had to be entertaining everybody, right? Same exact thing until you finally learn 40 years later that you could have said, no, I don't want to do that for these people who are snoozing while I'm doing my thing. No, right?
And you would have been very authentic and you would have been more connected to yourself if you had been able to do that.
Right. I totally relate to everything you're saying. How do you work with people to help them learn to what you call run their show?
So I talk about running your show, which means being in charge of yourself. So if you're not kind of paying attention to what's meaningful, then all the default stuff is going to show up and run your show. All of your shame is going to run your show. All of your fear is going to show up and run your show. All the stuff that's left over from childhood. That's what kind of makes your decisions for you. And, that's how you decide which direction you're going to go. But if you can show up for yourself and, even though I'm embarrassed that I'm standing in a taekwondo class in front of all these people with wet pants, it is important to me to show up. And so that's what I do. That was me running my show, not my shame running my show. And so I help people separate out who they are from their shame and their fear and all of the other feelings that tend to show up and take over. And that process of finding out who you are, that process of connecting to yourself and learning that you should be prioritizing your needs. You should be prioritizing your feelings. You should be getting in touch with all of that stuff. That, people have not done that their whole lives. There are people who have never had the opportunity to just sit and feel what they're feeling and know that it's okay and they don't have to do anything about it. It's so powerful.
It really is. It's fantastic that you help people with that. I'm sure that they also worry once you teach them how to run their show, though, about the flack they're going to get from people who don't approve of what they're doing with their show. And that's when the boundaries come in again, right?
Absolutely. The boundaries and the self-acceptance, because when you know that you are worthy and acceptable, it suddenly doesn't matter so much what somebody else thinks. When you're a kid, it matters so much what your parents think. You are emotionally tied to them for your emotional survival. But when you're an adult, you don't have those ties anymore, or you don't have to have those ties anymore. And so the more that you are, I call it standing on your solid ground. The more that you are connected to yourself and you're standing on your solid ground, you don't need anybody else's solid ground. It doesn't matter what they think. It's not relevant to who you are.
Yeah, it's so important, Suzanne. And I think it also changes the way people receive you because the vibe you're putting out about yourself is different. Also, you're not presenting as this victim that they can roll over anymore.
Absolutely.
Right? So that gets us to the transformative ways that life gets better when a person starts to work on healing and how healing involves aligning with ourselves and what we want for ourselves, which is what we're talking about. So why should everybody listening to this interview think about if they should go to Suzanne or someone and work on healing their stuff, which requires time and energy and expense and all that. But why is it worth it? Why should people go out of their way to help themselves by healing?
So when you're stuck in your pain, you're handcuffed to your pain, right? You kind of can't get away from it. And that was me for over 40 years. I was stuck in my pain about my mom. As long as I was stuck in that pain, I was living a life that was about my pain. And it was really about my pain and my mom. So I wasn't able to heal. I wasn't able to live a life that really served me. And once I started to heal, and this is what I want for everybody, you get liberation. You get empowerment. Suddenly you're in charge of your life and you have choices that you never had before. And that is super, super empowering, important. When you heal, suddenly you are able to create a life that supports you. I talk all the time about creating a juicy life. Before I did my healing, my life wasn't juicy. It was like bland and kind of empty. And now that I've done all this healing, talking about peeing your pants, for me, that's really juicy. That like connects me to people. That like, that's interesting. That's rich. And so the more that you heal, you've got the power to actually make these choices to live a life that's juicy and supportive and really serves you.
You know what it feels like to me when you've and please disagree if you don't agree with me, but it feels to me like if you are just living this smaller life because you're going to get trod on, rejected, and all of this, you kind of become a flat beige personality. Once you heal, all these beautiful colors that you never even knew were there start to emerge from you. Would you say?
Oh my gosh.
It's very freeing. I mean, that's been my experience. It's like, oh, wow, I didn't know this about myself.
Yeah. Yeah. I talk about, I was a cardboard version of myself before. And now I mean, people who met me 20 years ago and people who meet me today kind of have very different experiences of me. And I love who I am now. And I never would have said that before. And I never would have written this book and told all of these very vulnerable things about myself. But it is freeing. It engages me with other people. It's all of these colors that you're talking about are so much more interesting and so much more relatable and so much more juicy than the flat, perfect, cardboard version of myself that everybody got in the past.
And I've also found that people like this newer version better. I had the older version to survive and think that I was pleasing everyone and to be accepted. And meanwhile, now they like this other version much better, right? And you're not even worried about if they're accepting you or not.
Totally, because you're relatable, because you're interesting. Yeah, totally. That makes so much sense.
So now that everyone wants to work with you and fix their stuff, I know that you do individual therapy. You have a consultation you offer for those who want to understand more about eating disorders and treatment for eating disorders. You do speaking engagements, and you have a new online course. So tell us all about all that you're doing, Suzanne, and the many ways that people can come to you to get healing and help.
So my 9-to-5 job is as an individual therapist. And so I see people both in person and through teletherapy. And I love engaging with people in this one-on-one way. It is so rewarding and important and powerful. And I feel so honored to be in this seat with people who are looking to make their lives juicy and to get into better relationships with themselves. I'm so honored to do this work. So that's my 9-to-5. The consultations that I do when people just want an hour or 2 hours or 3 hours to just understand either themselves or somebody that they love. It's really helpful to just sit down and talk about what an eating disorder is or how to deal with anxiety. Or I also talk about the mother wound, which was another subject of my book. So consultations are just for, kind of quick, intense discussions and understandings. And then speaking engagements, I speak about all kinds of things, including eating disorders and healing from eating disorders, but also self-acceptance and the mother wound and dealing with narcissistic parents. And then I'm so excited. Thank you for mentioning my course. I actually now have 4 courses on my website with 3 more to come.
You've been busy.
I know. I'm so excited. This is like my new passion. I'm so happy to talk about it. So my big course is called Healing from Your Childhood and Transforming Your Life. And that's 2.5 hours. And I put everything I know about psychology into that course. I put everything that I know about creating a juicy life, unhooking from your parents' messages, letting go of the intergenerational hot potato, all that stuff is in there. I'm so, so, so excited to be offering that to people. And your listeners are going to get a coupon code for 25% off of that course, which I'm very happy to be giving.
I think that is wonderful.
Thank you.
I really
Thank
do.
you. And then the other courses there's a series of courses that I've created called 10 Tools For. So I've got 10 tools for anxiety, 10 tools for depression, and 10 tools for a world on fire are the 3 that are out right now. And this is just really practical. What is anxiety? What does it look like? And give me 10 therapy strategies that I can use very practically right now to cope with it. The one that's called 10 Tools for coping with a world that's on fire is free. So I want everybody who is stressed or sad or devastated by what's going on in our world right now, to have some support. And this is the way that I'm trying to support folks, is offering this free course. So that's there too.
When is that going to be available, this free course?
It is available
the entire
today.
country will want to sign up for that free course.
It was, I think last night around midnight, all these courses finally got all on my website and everything. So they are all there. It is ready to go. If you're listening to this course, please go to my website and download that free course especially.
That's marvelous. And we will be providing links to everything that Suzanne is doing for all of you. And it's so important. And I'm glad you mentioned your offer that you have for everyone. And what is the Suzanne tip? The key to finding joy in life? I know you say that it's to think small, but you need to explain that to us.
So think small. Man, I talk about this all the time. When we're looking for joy or when we're looking for healing, we tend to look big. We tend to think we need big things. We need a change in where we live, or a change in our relationship, or a change in our career. And that may all be true, but those are big things, and that's not going to bring joy today. So when you're looking for joy, I really want you to look for small moments of joy. And it could be, for me, it would be biting into a brownie. That is a wonderful moment of joy for me.
With chocolate chips, even better.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. But it could be, getting into bed at night, your head hitting the pillow, pulling up the covers and being nice and cozy. That's a moment of joy. Or your child telling you they love you, or hearing your friends laugh. These are all just small moments that if we're not paying attention, we could kind of just pass right by and they don't impact us. But if we're paying attention, we have all these moments throughout our day that we can receive so much meaning from and so much joy from. And we can create those moments too, right? I can go home and make some brownies, or I can go home and call my friend and have a conversation with her. So it's all about the small things and sort of collecting these small moments.
That's beautiful, Suzanne. I want to highlight this very wise and transformative quote from your compelling memoir for our Grief and Rebirth podcast audience. I just love this quote. We are all separate people with separate experiences of life. We are all on our own individual journeys with different intentions, values, and goals based on our individual histories and personalities. I don't have to be offended or upset if someone doesn't experience me as good enough, because I don't have control over the lens they're looking through. Suzanne, that profound and empowering quote beautifully captures the transformative journey of embracing self-worth. Through your candid memoir, which blends personal vulnerability with psychological insight, and your companion guided journal, you offer a profound lifeline for those navigating intergenerational pain and seeking their own paths to self-acceptance, healing, and growth. Thank you from my heart for bringing your healing light and expertise to our cherished Grief and Rebirth listeners through this important, enlightening interview. And as I like to say, to be continued, thank you again, Suzanne, and many blessings.
Irene, thank you so much for having me. This has been really, really wonderful. I'm so excited to be here.
And I'm so excited to know you. Thank you so much. Really, truly.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for tuning in to Grief and Rebirth. Remember, you can dive deeper into everything we've discussed by checking out the show notes and all past episodes at ireneweinberg.com. Don't forget to follow us on social media at Irene S. Weinberg on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, and wherever you love to hang out online. Plus, we're on YouTube, so be sure to subscribe and never miss a video. For those of you listening, you'll find links to my 2 books, Good to the Last Drop and They Serve Bagels in Heaven, in the show notes. And if you're watching on YouTube, you can see those books listed right above, so don't miss out. And here comes a special treat. If you sign up for Audible as a first-time user using my link, which you can find in the show notes, you can get They Serve Bagels in Heaven for free. And finally, people often ask me what I read, what I use, and what I recommend for healing and self-care. So I've carefully curated a compilation of those items to share with you. You can head over to kit.co/grief and rebirth to check them out. Thanks again for tuning in, and until next time, many blessings.